And welcome everyone to this week's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. After a little Easter and Eid and Passover break, and I hope you all had a wonderful time in that break, but we're back. My name's Sue Macdonald and I'm the curator for the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals and the Maternity and Midwifery Hour, which this is it. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this evening. I think it's going to be really interesting, as it always is. Every week we have something really fascinating. I think you'll enjoy this evening's too. I'm joined by Wendy Jones, who's been with us before. I always say once we've had you once, we want to keep having you back again and again. And Catherine Kelly, who's new, and we'll probably do the same to her. And as we do to our lovely guests every time, we've asked them to share a little moment of the week just to start things off. So could I start with Wendy, perhaps? Your moment of the week, Wendy.
Okay, my moment of the week was today because I was babysitting my granddaughter this morning, and when she's 7 months old, I'm the youngest of my 7 grandchildren, and she came and she was within about 10 minutes of her being here, she was ready for a nap. And she snuggled in, a typical breastfed baby. She was just snuggled into my boobs, hand up, just holding on to me, and slept. And I went to put her down and thought, no, I'm just going to enjoy the oxytocin and stop here. And lovely. I feel invigorated.
How lovely. That's a lovely moment of the week. And I'm sure it'll be followed by even more moments by the sound of things.
Yes.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Wendy. Now, how about Catherine? Can you compete with that?
I know, exactly, I can. My moment of the week was I was on Monday discharged from physio after a year-long physio appointments with because I had an operation on my knee a year ago. So I passed my tests and got out of it.
Whoa! So when is the marathon?
Oh, not anytime soon.
I have that on my mind because obviously this Sunday was the London Marathon. So Twitter is full of lots of really positive images of people racing along. And I'm thinking perhaps I should, after I've got to my 5 kilometers from my couch, maybe that's something for the future, but I'll hold that for a little bit anyway. So thank you very much for your moments of the week. That's a really good place to start for us. Now I'm just going to do my usual thing of reminding people we have new people this evening. So welcome to, if you're new and you haven't been here before, just to sort of tell you a little bit, a tiny bit about the history of the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. We were born in the pandemic, as a lot of babies were actually in that time and onwards ever since actually. And we were born because obviously with the lockdown, midwives and student midwives and maternity care support workers, all the people in the maternity services didn't have access to face-to-face opportunities of continuing professional development. They didn't have study days, they didn't have conferences, they didn't have festivals. So we kind of started this as a weekly information package. So it was very good, and tonight we'll show that it's quite a good little chunk of information for people and a way of interacting together. So at the end of the programme, those of you who are new, you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. Those of you who are old and have been before, I'll look forward to seeing some of your questions coming in, because our audiences are par excellence. They always come up with fantastic questions, and I'm sure tonight won't be an exception. Now, just to remind you also, everything that we do is recorded. So if you come to our festivals, everything's recorded. This Maternity and Midwifery Hour is recorded. So if you enjoy this evening, which I know you will, and you've not listened before, you might want to go and access some more. There are about, I think it's 1,300 or 1,400 sessions, and that includes the festivals and includes the hour. And you can go into Mapflix and have a look and see what's available. And there's a huge amount. So if you're doing a project, if you're doing a dissertation, if you're doing a project at work, or if you just want to do your revalidation, perfect access for this. So I want to say a big thank you to everyone for all the work you're doing, because I know it's with all the things that are going on, including the industrial action, including the kind of comments that are being made, it is hard to be in the health service at the moment, but we salute you because you are fantastic. The health service is fantastic. Keep on doing what you're doing, but actually look after yourselves. Be kind to yourselves and each other, because it's easy when we're all stressed and hassled to just be a bit snipey sometimes. So just keep yourself mindful of how you are to other people. I'm sure you will, but I don't get off my soapbox here, Sue. So I'm hoping you all had a lovely break over Eid, Passover and Easter. It seems like a long time since I've been sitting in this chair. And I just a little teeny snippets of news. This week is Black Maternal Health Awareness Week from the 24th to the 30th. And that's a really good reminder for us all to just be more aware of the needs of our Black and brown mums and babies and families, and really tune in to what their needs are and how we're treating them, how we're caring for them. And actually, because of that, I've been noticing the tweets from 5 times more, which have been a fantastic pressure group for really getting people to notice the terrible maternal mortality and morbidity statistics for Black and brown mums. Their tweets have been really interesting, and I've been enjoying them sort of coming up with things just to make me think a little bit. And today the tweets have been about Muslim Black mums or brown mums, whichever, and just thinking about people who might be facing more than one form of disadvantage. And I think it's just good to think on. So if you're a Twitterer or tweeter, check out the 5 times more. It's really good source of information and linking with other people. Also today, hot off the press, is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And this is the Intrapartum Care for Healthy Women and Babies draft for consultation. And this is obviously April 2023. It came out this morning. And this updates the 2014 guidelines. It's well worth looking at. We've put the link on the resources, but beware, don't press print before you know that it's about 176 pages. And that's a lot of printing. So make sure that you know that before you start. But I will commend you to have a look at it and comment on it. I think sometimes we're a bit shy about making comments or having to comment on the whole thing. We all have our pet things. So go in and have a look and see if it's got the sort of things that you think should be there. Or if you know about a piece of research that you want to just check that's actually hit the guidelines, go in and have a check and put it in. Really good to put your 10 penneth in there. That's your homework there. Oh, the other bit of homework is, if you haven't, now because we've got someone next week who might well comment upon this, I'm going to say this is your homework for tonight or maybe tomorrow. And this is the 3-year delivery plan for maternity and neonatal services from NHS England. So it's England, but I know that our colleagues in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland might well be interested in looking through this as well. So have a look at it. It's not 179 pages. It's not too bad. And it is very interesting indeed. Okay. Also, I'm going to just not to forget, I think, again, hot off the news feature was midwives have voted to settle and agreed the new renewed pay offer. So that's just off the news. I think the vote was 57% in favour of accepting. I think people are getting tired. That's the difficulty. Anyway, now exactly on time. I'm exactly on time. I'm very pleased with this. Now, in this in this session, we're going to look at Entonox. Now, this has been for many years a treasured form of pain relief for women in labour, as well as for other forms of pain relief in other spheres. But we're looking at pain relief in labour mainly tonight. But I know that in the media, there's been a lot of kind of focus on it. And partly it's because in some places, and this is from February, mums-to-be face agony as gas and air is turned off to protect midwives. So there's some concern about the use of it and whether there's an excess Entonox in the air. There's also, and you might have this locally, I used to, when I was running sometimes, see these little canisters, and the canisters have got bigger, and I didn't really know what they were until someone pointed out they're actually about Entonox. And of course, there's been a whole lot in the media about people who are abusing Entonox as a recreational drug. So this is quite multifaceted, and I'm hoping that our two guests are going to bring us to understanding a little bit more and starting to question what's happening with Entonox. So I'm delighted that we're being joined by one of our founder members of the UK breastfeeding charity, Breastfeeding Network, and that's Dr. Wendy Jones MBE. She's been an NCT breastfeeding counsellor, and you can see from her little moment of the week how keen she is on breastfeeding and things like the oxytocin activity. So she's a very knowledgeable woman, and she was awarded a Points of Light award in the UK. Prime Minister Theresa May in 2018, an MBE in the New Year's Honours List in 2018 for services to mothers and babies, very richly deserved. And she's known for her work in providing a service in the compatibility of drugs in breast milk. And she's been a registered breastfeeding supporter for 35 years. And she says, I'm sure she'll say this as well, breastfeeding should be valued by all and medication should not be a barrier. So, Wendy, welcome. The screen is now yours. Really pleased that you have been able to come this evening.
So, saying that I've been qualified as breastfeeding supporter for 35 years, I just suddenly feel so old. Thank you for that one. Yeah, it's that part of my life has taken over. So it was really interesting, actually, to look at something completely different around Entonox, because my experience of using Entonox was as a mum. My youngest is 35 years old, which is why I know how long I've been qualified, because I finished doing all my paperwork whilst on bed rest with hypertension, as you do. So I used it then, and I also used it when I broke a wrist a few years ago. So I know from a mum's point of view how valuable it is. My slides don't want to go up. Come on, where's the slides? Okay, yeah. So when Sue first asked me to look at it, I'd already been aware of all these headlines, which, if you were a mum about to deliver at the time these headlines were out, I think you would have become quite anxious, because you'd be thinking, well, I'd always thought gas and air and a natural birth would be okay, but all of a sudden it's being taken away and it's not an option. So it must have been quite terrifying. But I think it was also terrifying for midwives, thinking, well, we've been using this for the whole of our lives, and now everybody's saying that it's dangerous. So, is that true? Is that true? It wasn't until yesterday, when I first met Catherine, that I realised I quoted the journal article that she's written. But I've been working with some anaesthetists doing some information, and it was quite a shock to me to realise that anaesthetic gases make up 5% of the carbon footprint in an acute hospital. I've been doing a lot of work on climate change and breastfeeding, and saying, breastfeeding is wonderful, it stops the carbon footprint. And yet here we are, we turn it all round, and we're destroying the ozone layer. And 1 kilogram of nitrous oxide has the same effect as 298 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Those were quite alarming statistics, something we hadn't thought about. We think about climate change, we think about our cars, we think about smoke, we think about power. But had we thought about something that we regard as part of normal life within a hospital setting? So King's College Hospital hospital found that most of the waste came from the piped manifold systems. And actually, only about 88% of what was purchased was actually used clinically. So we were wasting 92% of something damaging the ozone layer. And that actually local small cylinders, as Sue said, the ones that we kind of grew up with, would drastically reduce waste. And how easily it can leak out if seals have deteriorated or demand valves are left open. So it's going back and looking at the way we use it as much as what we use. So Entonox to a labouring mother is something that she can focus on, something that makes her breathe, something that acts as an anxiolytic. And most women would consider just using Entonox would be a natural birth, and something that a lot of us have strived for, and I know my kids did. So going into labour, it's something you want to know that it's there, that it's straight away available to you whenever you need it. You don't have to wait 30 minutes for an on-call anaesthetist to come and put in an epidural or for painkillers or anything else, and that there's no evidence of it causing any harm. So that it's not only okay in labour, it's okay in breastfeeding, it's okay immediately postpartum. So something that we maybe love and trust. But it was in relation to its occupational impact that we started to be more worried, and how much of a negative effect was it having on staff. So using doubling masks were more effective than scavenging tools. That's lovely. Most places they don't exist. And that there's some degree of cracking technology. But these are all things that we probably don't have because the NHS is strapped for cash to make these changes. So what can we do to make it safe for midwives and for mothers and still produce adequate pain relief? That's got to be our gold standard, hasn't it? So the COSH risk assessment came out in March 23. I had a lovely time. I fell asleep twice trying to read it. And it talked about environmental ventilation and local extract ventilation, which I assume means opening a window or having an extractor fan. But things like where you as a midwife are relative to the mother. But I think as most midwives, you tend to be next to the mother, reassuring her. You don't want to be at the far end going, it's okay, dear, just carry on. You're doing very well, dear. It sounds like more like something out of the midwife. You've got to be there. You've got to be close, because that's what midwifery is about, isn't it? You're being with mother. That's the definition of midwife. But we do need to be aware of this risk assessment, and maybe we need to revisit the training issues around the administration and look at how we can keep ourselves safe and what to look out for. All the references that are at the bottom of the screens in green everywhere are all on the reference list that Sue has that she'll upload for you. And then I realised that nitrous oxide is going to is under the Psychoactive Substances Act, which doesn't sound quite like natural childbirth. And it's a Class C controlled substance because it causes the psychoactive effects, euphoria. And it's actually under this act, it's an offence to knowingly or recklessly supply nitrous oxide for its psychoactive effects. So all these people who are selling these little canisters at Glastonbury or whatever music festival or whatever party these people have been going to are actually causing causing a criminal offence, and that they government have actually decided that they're going to tighten up on this considerably and make it much more of an offence. So the Minister for Crime, Policing and Fire says they're bringing forward to control it under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and making it much more of an area for prohibition. Now, I do wonder how this is going to happen, if every rave is going to be policed for the nitrous oxide canisters, whether we will see slightly less when out and about, because as Sue said, on the run, wherever you go, you see these little tiny canisters on the floor. It's also been used for whipping cream in kitchens for chefs. So when it's used as an analgesic in labour, one of the things that we need to be aware of is that its effectiveness is reduced if the patient isn't using it properly. And what people often do is actually take the mask away from their mouths when they're exhaling. Now, I read this, I'm not a midwife. Having been on one end of the scheme is very different from you watching what's happening. So something to be aware of. And particularly if there isn't any particular ventilation going around, maybe you need to open a window. I always find midwifery units seem to be incredibly hot. And I know we need to keep the newborns warm, but sometimes for a labouring mother, you need to be naked for more than one reason. And I always worry about the poor dads who are up there. They're not fainting because of the sight of the blood. They're fainting because they're hot. But maybe we need to think about where we are and turning the gas off when it's not in use. So it's just being aware that there is a theoretical risk to us, but not all of the time, and it shouldn't impact on how you do your job. Because a lot of the data that we're getting on the effects of the exposure is actually about long-term, regular exposure, but to a level that is in misuse. So it's about memory loss, it's about vitamin B depletion, incontinence, weakened immune systems. But I don't think this is anything that we've ever thought about before. I've never seen a midwife ask me, is it okay if I'm using nitrous oxide? In my case, it's always because I'm breastfeeding. I have had vets ask me, one vet said that she was anaesthetising a ferret, and the mask would not be able to be tightly sealed around the ferret's mouth, so there would be some leakage. So this is an extreme example. And would it be okay for her to breastfeed her baby that evening? I get these kind of really interesting different questions in my life. But it did make me think, in that situation, you would be noticing that you were drowsy or giggly, and that might not just be a sign of your exhaustion, which I'm all too well aware it can be part of your daily lives. Vitamin B12 depletion does seem to come up in a lot of the studies and can cause neurological disorders. So if you think you have problems with your vision, your memory, pins and needles, it's probably a good idea to go and ask if you can have a blood test so that it can reassure you that somebody is monitoring your B12 and that if it is deficient, then you can have a regular dose of vitamin B12, because B12 is actually poorly absorbed orally. So when we add it into multivitamins, it actually we absorb very little of it. There are reported problems with reproductive risks, but it seems to be largely in much older papers, when I suspect the COSH regulations were really minimal. And perhaps it's much more about non-legitimate users exceeding the current health exposure limits. So there can be congenital abnormalities, spontaneous abortions. If this is something that you're worried about, please go and talk to somebody. Go and talk to the your line manager and see if your area can be risk assessed just in case. But the recreational use is going up and up in 18 to 24-year-olds, as it is a festival drug. It's not illegal to use it, but it is illegal to possess with intent to supply. And these are the ones who get the disorientation, the headache, loss of coordination. It all sounds a bit like being drunk, but much more readily absorbed. And you get the fun things of making your voice go a bit funny, and it's a bit of a game to play. And nobody's going to think that this is dangerous in the same way as we think about drugs of misuse and alcohol. So people who are using it regular long-term may well have permanent problems. And there have been deaths because people have done stupid things like put plastic bags over their heads and inhale the canisters with a plastic bag over their head and actually suffocate. But we're taking the evidence from misuse and changing it into possible evidence in regular normal use, which isn't the same thing. So my conclusion from everything that I've done is know that there's a potential risk, but don't panic unless you feel sick and dizzy after attending a birth, other than for exhaustion. If you want a blood test, go and get one. And I'm sure the health and safety everywhere are looking about risk assessments in the environment. But also remember, at the other end is a labouring mum who maybe doesn't want an epidural, or there isn't an anaesthetist available, or isn't somebody available within the time that she needs that painkillers, which is where the headlines came from. I had to give birth with just paracetamol. We don't want a crop of mums being over-medicated because a group of teenagers are using it for fun. I hope that's reassuring. I hope it makes sense, but I'd be really interested later on to hear your thoughts.
That's fabulous, Wendy. Thank you so much. I don't know how you managed to get all of that, all the complexities in there. If I can just say, I was in touch with the Royal College of Midwives, and you'll know when you were talking about health and safety, it's important to know that in the UK, most trusts will have, or boards will have, a midwife who's an RCM health and safety rep locally, and a lot of them are dealing with issues around this. So if there is a sort of local concern, that's the person to go to, and you can also contact the RCM via their direct web on the website, and there is a whole website with concerns and information available. So there is work going on. But we like to be at the cutting edge here, as always. And thank you so much, Wendy. I think that's a really interesting thought, to think of us being influenced by all these festival goers. Oh dear.
Don't make me started. It'll make me feel old again.
No. That's always the music.
I remember Woodstock.
And I think there was some shenanigans then too, Wendy.
Very much.
But we won't go
Mostly
there now.
involving lack of clothes.
We won't go there just now. So thank you very much. I won't be able to think about ferrets now. And we're now going to move to Catherine Kelly, who's waiting there. She's a final year medical student at the University of Dundee, and she completed this piece of research on Entonox during her BMSc degree in international health 2 years ago. And as these things do take a while to get back into publication, this research was recently published in the British Journal of Midwifery, and it seemed very timely. And Catherine very kindly agreed to come and share her research with us. So this is lovely, getting nice research hot off the press. So welcome, Catherine. The screen is now yours.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Always.
Okay.
Okay, we're just having some fun with some gremlins on the IT side. Catherine is getting the presentation up.
Yes.
Yeah.
See that now? Great. Okay, great. Well, first I'd like to thank Sue for inviting me to speak this evening. My name is Catherine Kelly, as she mentioned, and I'm a final year medical student at the University of Dundee. And as Sue mentioned, I completed a Bachelor in Medical Science 2 years ago in International Health, during which I completed this project and dissertation surrounding the use of Entonox in obstetrics, with the issue of sustainability being at the core of this project. But I do touch on some of the kind of issues that Wendy mentioned as well, about the occupational risks which exist as well. So to give you a little bit of a background regarding why we undertook this study, in 2008, the Climate Change Act guaranteed a 100% reduction of the UK's carbon emissions by the year 2050 against a 1990 baseline. Now, as some of you may be aware, the NHS is the largest contributor to these emissions of the public sector, which means that it has a major role to play in the achievement of such targets which were set out in the Climate Change Act. And as Wendy mentioned, anaesthetic gases produce 5% of acute organisations' carbon footprint, with nitrous oxide and desflurane being the greatest culprits for this negative climate effect. A 2020 paper suggested that a vital measure anaesthetists can take is to try and avoid using these anaesthetic gases in order to limit their carbon footprint, as 1 tonne of nitrous oxide has almost the same global warming potential as 300 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Now, as you're all aware, nitrous oxide is used regularly in childbirth in the form of Entonox, which is a 50-50 mix of nitrous oxide and oxygen. And essentially, my study endeavoured to gain an understanding of the current perceptions surrounding its use. So this project was structured using an adapted human factors framework, which is known as the Systems Engineering Initiative for Patient Safety 2.0. This is the original model, and we adapted that to become the Systems Engineering Initiative for Sustainable Healthcare. The use of this framework enabled a focus on the system design of Entonox use and the way it impacts the process and its outcomes, as we understood that the use of Entonox is a complex system which needed understanding before attempting systemic reform. So the overall aim of this study was to identify and evaluate the system in which Entonox is used in the Scottish hospital studied, using the Systems Engineering Initiative for Sustainable Healthcare framework, which, as I said, is an adapted human factors model. More specifically, the study hoped to identify the work system factors which act as barriers or facilitators to Entonox use. It aimed to explore alternatives to Entonox and how they are perceived by obstetric staff, to identify perceived outcomes for patients and their families, obstetric staff, the organisation, and the environment. And finally, we hoped to provide recommendations for reconfiguring the current system for potential future change in Entonox use. I'll now give you a brief overview of the methodology that was utilised in this study. The project was registered with and approved by the Theatres, Anaesthesia and Critical Care Clinical Governance Group, that's a mouthful, in the studied NHS board, and that was in order to permit staff interviews. It was a qualitative case study which used document analysis and semi-structured interviews. And the interviews took place with 10 midwives and 1 environmental manager. The recruitment of midwives was initially initiated via email invitation. However, in reality, most midwives participated in the research due to word of mouth. Each interview lasted between 14 and 30 minutes, and they were all based upon a common question guide, which consisted of mainly open questions. The data analysis used a mix of deductive and inductive thematic analysis on the documents and interview transcripts, with the factors of the SIPS 2.0 framework acting as the main themes, with their emergent sub-themes becoming apparent during inductive analysis. Inter-rater reliability between researchers was used to reduce the bias, with the kappa score of 0.725 being calculated, which can be interpreted as substantial agreement between researchers. Now, onto the results. So, shown in this image are the results gained from the document analysis and the analysis of interview transcripts. In the middle circle, you can see the SESH themes, which were taken from the SIPS 2.0 model, and the sub-themes are indicated in relation to each of these themes. The sub-themes that we found were based upon recurring statements which came up in document analysis, in the interview transcript analysis, or in both. So at the center of the circle there, you can see the person, and the sub-themes that we gained in this theme were midwives' knowledge, women in labour, others identified within the system, and staff occupational health. With regards to the internal environment, we've got the location of use and the ventilation and scavenging which is available. With regards to the external environment, we have midwifery training, external education, environmental wokeness, and protocols and guidelines for safe Entonox use. Tasks that we identified were the patient's use of Entonox, staff tasks with Entonox, such as setting up and teaching patients how to use Entonox, tasks which involve sustainability more generally, and tasks involving other analgesics. And then the tools that we identified were Entonox as a tool, a potential new mask, which Wendy touched upon, the double mask, which is thought to be better for collecting the used Entonox, and alternative analgesics for women in labour. And then finally, with regards to the organisation, the sub-themes were local training, environmental sustainability culture, safety culture, and compliance with documents. So one thing that's quite important to highlight is that the sub-themes about occupational health and its recognition in the guidelines which we analysed were recognised in the document analysis alone and weren't identified by midwives in the semi-structured interviews. And then I've attached a couple of quotes which reiterate sentiments which were brought up in several interviews surrounding the use of Entonox, with one midwife saying that sustainability isn't really something that's discussed, to be perfectly honest, so I couldn't say that I know an awful lot. And another that a lot of women would really struggle to not get Entonox because it's such a cultural thing. These outcomes were gained as themes from the semi-structured interviews, and they were vital in giving an understanding of midwives' perceptions of the effects that Entonox has on different elements of the system. It also gave us an indication of how likely or willing midwives were to change their use of Entonox based on their knowledge of its poor environmental impact. Now, this slide shows some pertinent quotes from several midwives which relate to the key findings, which I'll discuss over the next few slides. So with regards to autonomy, one midwife highlighted the vital aspect of maternal choice. With regards to sustainability, one midwife made the point that even the most basic environmental tasks aren't occurring on the labour ward or in the midwifery unit, which inferred that undertaking these tasks is necessary prior to trying to reform the system with a reduction in a widely used pain relief that's really important for women in labour. Another midwife highlighted just how painful labour is, and she therefore wouldn't deny a woman analgesia in the form of Entonox purely for the reason of environmental sustainability. And then with regards to occupational health, one midwife felt that knowledge of detrimental health effects would deter her from wanting to encourage the use of Entonox for a woman. However, at the point of the interview, she did not have any knowledge of such occupational effects which were possible. And then finally, another midwife believed that knowledge of occupational health effects was unlikely to deter women in labour themselves from using it as a pain relief in their labour. From the results that we gained, some particularly important discussion points were gleaned. Facilitators and barriers towards Entonox use were identified, and these are shown in the diagram on the slide here. The facilitators of ease of use, Entonox's safety and short-term effects, and the aspect of maternal choice currently have greater force, according to midwives, than the barriers, which were identified as the side effects of Entonox and its occupational and environmental effects. Furthering this point, many midwives were not aware of such occupational or environmental effects prior to the interviews taking place. Alternatives to Entonox do exist, which I'm sure you're all aware of. However, there is not a comparable analgesic which is as easy to use with such rapid onset and offset. The midwives I spoke to had a lack of knowledge surrounding Entonox risks, which inferred that the organisation were not providing sufficient education at this point about such risks. And finally, there were discrepancies between the analysis of documents and of the semi-structured interviews, in which the guidelines provided information regarding the safe use of Entonox, but none of the midwives mentioned these when discussing its use during the interviews. This highlighted that more could be done to ensure that the midwives in this health board are aware of the guidelines which are in place. Results of the analysis gave us the opportunity to create some recommendations regarding the use of Entonox. Senior management within this health board must lead by example to create and enable a culture of sustainability within the organisation. And if we are to effectively reduce the use of Entonox, it is vital that healthcare workers' knowledge of its risks improve. More research into the installation of an Entonox destruction unit, which is already used in Sweden and has recently been trialled in some UK hospitals, would allow for continued use of Entonox whilst greatly reducing its carbon footprint. It also became apparent through literature searching that further research potentially could be required to truly understand the occupational effects. Sustainability culture has been recognised, and therefore more research could be conducted to understand attitudes within the NHS towards sustainability a bit more generally. In conclusion, a reduction of Entonox in the current system that we studied was an undesirable outcome for both midwives and for patients, but would be a desirable outcome in terms of environmental and occupational health. Therefore, more work is required to either find an alternative which could work to replace Entonox, or the introduction of catalytic cracking would allow its continued use with a much reduced environmental impact. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope that it's been of some interest to you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Catherine. I think the questions will start coming in. We've had one or two comments, but I think what is really interesting to me as a teacher of midwives is the kind of lack of education, because I guess I would expect students to be very well informed about drugs and medicines, and that would include Entonox, and that was a bit of it sort of moves your footing a little bit. And the scavenger, I'm aware that there are some scavenger systems. Is that the same as this cracking that you were talking about?
So there are in the hospital that I studied in, there is scavenging systems in the mouthpiece that you blow back into does take the used gas and air away from the room in theory, and that kind of removes it from the internal environment, but that goes directly to the external environment, you know, into the environment as nitrous oxide, if that makes sense. But the cracking is that it goes into a unit which then splits the nitrous oxide back into nitrogen and oxygen, and that means that it doesn't have any environmental impact. But one of the issues with the scavenging system that's in place at the moment is that a lot of the midwives identified the fact that women often breathe in using the mouthpiece and then forget to breathe out using the mouthpiece as well. So that all goes into the internal environment for the midwives to then breathe in.
Which is why the two of you together, it was fantastic, because Wendy had already talked about the way women, and I know as a midwife, some women will take off the mask and breathe out, and you know, that's part of the kind of learning for them and the learning for us as well in knowing this. And I guess the scavenging, the really sophisticated scavenging, is where you're getting the Entonox going into this system and being sorted out so it becomes not a problem at all to the environment, which is really critical. Because I think probably Wendy and I would be on the same page on saying women ought to have this choice about Entonox, having seen it's a very effective drug to be used. But it's quite stunning what an environmental effect it potentially has. That's quite stunning. So thank you both of you for highlighting that for me. Oh, there's some comments have come through. And forgive me, audience, if you don't know, I'm looking at my other screen to get the comments and questions for Wendy and for Catherine. And we have Katie, and I always have problems with your name, Katie Polkiewicz, and I bet I haven't pronounced that right, but I hope I have. And she says, thank you, Wendy. B12 deficiency in midwives could be a large and unseen, unreported problem. Well, I'm hoping not, but I think the idea is if you get anxious about pursuing it, I think was really helpful, Wendy, for that. So that's a comment. Now I've got a question from Suzanne Crozier. Hi, Suzanne, who says, has an analysis or comparison been done between Entonox use for 60 or 90 minutes and the plastic paraphernalia and disposable equipment required for an epidural? Whoa. I don't know who I'd direct that question to. I don't, Catherine, you might know, that might have been something that had been discussed in your formative work in the project, I guess.
Yeah, so we didn't ever do a direct comparison between the two, but I have seen research and papers that actually, and I don't know about the timings of how long Entonox is used for versus the use of an epidural, but definitely I have seen links that have said that an epidural has a lesser environmental impact than I can't remember where I saw that, so I'll have a look online and see if I can retrace where I saw that.
Oh, so we're giving Catherine homework now. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne. So we might have an answer for you. So check out tomorrow. We'll put something up if Catherine finds some little glimmer or something. Another comment from Nikki, who says it's clear that a robust education needs to be developed urgently for midwives to safely use Entonox. This needs to be national to ensure consistency. I think that's a fair comment, Nikki, and I think it would go well. Wendy, you want to say, you're urging to say something, I think.
I think we've kind of uncovered a big unknown. We don't know if there's a B12 deficiency that we haven't identified. We don't, and other than Catherine's work, we don't know. Well, I certainly was not aware that nitrous oxide was quite such an environmental pollution. So, it's part of our developing understanding of what we don't know. Our conscious ignorance.
We need students and for midwives to get knowledgeable. So hopefully all of you who are listening and watching will share with your colleagues what you're learning, which is very good to be doing. Okay, we've got another comment. Lots of comments. I think you've stirred people's brains here, which is fab. And that's Diane Garland. Hi, Diane, who says, we were trained in the use of Entonox when I trained in 1982. As a midwife, mainly in clinical practice, we've always been aware of ventilation and never experienced any symptoms, no vitamin B12 blood tests. We certainly never thought about environmental issues. Well, I mean, it is new. So thank you, Diane. That's a good point. Another comment from Michelle Sohan. And the message seems to be that the withdrawal of Entonox analgesia interpartum is a knee-jerk reaction to overuse in the wider community, the 18-24-year-olds and festival goers. The impact on carbon footprint is alarming and needs to be managed with scavenging systems. So I think we've managed to kind of show how complex this whole issue is of something. And I think this is really good because it's something that we've taken for granted for a long time. And both Wendy and Catherine are really highlighting it's not as easy as it might appear. So, and we need to question it. And Nikki, hi Nikki, is saying trusts are asking us as an LMNS about training, as I think there's now a gap. And I think that's a good move. Okay, we've got a question now. Claire Winter, hi Claire, says, what about the environmental effects of other pain relief? Do we sacrifice women's care for the environment? Be interesting to see the environmental effects of unnecessary cesarean sections. Okay. Wendy or Catherine, did you want to make a comment in response? I think that's quite a difficult one to respond to.
I think that maybe one of the interesting things I found when I was interviewing midwives was that I was a medical student coming in looking to take away Entonox, which wasn't at all the kind of aim of the study. It was more to gauge what, how valuable it is to midwives and how difficult would that be. And I think that was what we found, is that actually, A, it's very valuable, and B, it would be very difficult to just remove that as an option for labouring women totally. And I think that one of the things is, one woman mentioned that some labouring mothers may be very environmentally driven, and that may make them think, I maybe won't use gas and air if I've got that information available to me, but not at all making women feel guilty if they choose that is something that they still do want to use. And the point about cesarean sections is completely valid. We've all been present at them, and you can see how much waste there is in that. And I think actually the point is I don't think the answer is just to cut Entonox, because that would be too difficult.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good point. Wendy.
What I was saying earlier, the Entonox thing is not just in midwifery, it's in things like colonoscopies, bone setting. It's throughout the acute section of the NHS. This is what we have relied on. And what are we going to replace it with? Are we then going to make everything very, very medicalized and reliant on drugs, which have just as much pollution and adverse effects? Even giving an opioid drug instead can cause the constipation. It could cause the baby to be drowsy. Any intervention has an action, a reaction, and we have to balance all of it.
I'm liking the balance, Wendy. I'm liking that. Thank you for that. Okay, we've got another. Oh gosh, we're coming thick and fast now. So we've got Linda JJ. Hi, Lisa, who says at our local trust we don't use a mask, just a two-piece mouthpiece. How does that work in the effect to the environment and staff? That's the sort of single, rather than the cover mouth, the little.
That was what they used in the trust that I studied as well. And in terms of for the staff, if patients are blowing back into the mouthpiece, it's got a double valved system, so it goes out of a different tube than it came in. Yeah. So environmentally, currently, that doesn't do anything. But in terms of the scavenging, if patients are properly blowing back into that, it is meant to remove much of the gas and air from the internal environment in the same way that a mask would. It just means that a woman has to ensure that she properly breathes back into the mouthpiece, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess some women prefer the mouthpiece to the mask as well. I know that's always been so. Okay, and now we've got Michelle Cern again. Thank you for updating me regarding the effect of Entonox on the environment. Our trust has had a number of women transfer their care in late pregnancy due to non-availability of Entonox in their local maternity unit. And I think that was this was sort of reported in the newspapers quite widely. But I know that nationally, people are working to make sure that things like the airflow in the unit is sufficient, because of course some of the modern hospitals probably have less airflow going through than the older ones that have kind of dodgy windows, actually, in effect. If that makes sense, you've got more opportunity for drafts to take away and disperse the gas. That's my understanding anyway. Wendy's looking a little bit skeptical. No, that's okay.
No, it's just a very long time since I gave birth.
Well, I guess maternity units vary a lot. So you have some very modern ones with non-opening windows, and then you've got others that have plenty of drafts going through. And then you've got some really super duper ones with fancy scavenging system. And that seems to be what we're all wanting to move towards if we're going to be able to use our Entonox. Okay, and Mary Smithers says, did they include the gases used for theatres and other parts of the hospital? I think she must mean, Catherine, in your project. Did anyone look at wider use of Entonox, or was it purely
we just looked? It was
obstetrics.
Our study didn't actually ever gain any quantitative data. It was purely the kind of qualitative data in regards to the midwives' opinions and the document analysis. But with regards to the windows aspect of things in the guidelines, that was something that was in the health board's guidelines, was that if Entonox is being used, there should be a window open in the labouring suite. But the midwives weren't aware that that was in the guidelines. And whenever I witnessed Entonox being used, the windows were closed. So that was something that was interesting to pick up on.
Well, as Wendy says, labour wards are always really warm as well. We always have them warm for the babies. Anyways, that's good. Okay, and then we've got comment from Sarah. I worked as a midwife in the States for a few years, and providers in the hospital are very sceptical of Entonox, and it isn't widely used. The main concerns cited were to do with B12 deficiency. That's interesting. Thank you for that, Sarah. That's really good to have that international flavour. And then Fatima Mohammed, isn't there also a concern over midwives' fertility due to long exposure of nitrous oxide? This and the environmental impact need to be addressed. We need to discuss nitrous oxide reduced use with an acceptable replacement. Yeah. Any comments? And we don't have a lot of time, so we have 4 more queries here. We've got Laura Petrie. Hi, Laura, who says maybe development of a meter staff could wear, like radiography, would be useful for monitoring staff exposure. I don't know if those such things exist for nitrous oxide. I've never seen them, but
over the last 3 years, we've discovered we can make anything, haven't we?
We have. So if there's an inventor out there, Dragon's Den, this is your chance to invent something that would be that's a really good idea. So well done, Laura Petrie. Well done to you. Mary Smithers says, Mary, I'm going to say this with a little smile. Mary Smithers says, if men had babies, would we be even having this discussion? I'm not sure. But Kimberly says, I think occupational exposure at a home birth is considerably lower than hospital wards. And that might be the draft issue. I don't know. Or maybe actually thinking about that logically, Kimberly, that might be about labours being slightly more fast in home settings sometimes. I'm not sure. Or women even having other things other than drugs to distract them from the pain. I mean, that's the other thing. This is a huge issue. And then Angela Cook, and this is going to be the last one, says, is there a safe level of nitrous oxide in a labour ward? Now, who would answer that one? I'm not sure. And nor is Wendy, or is Catherine.
There is an upper limit of if they test the air, what should be allowed in the NHS for there to be in the kind of internal environment, that level of nitrous oxide. I'm not entirely sure what level that is, and I don't know how regularly monitored it is, but I think during research it was that we kind of found that there maybe isn't strict monitoring to ensure that that's always, that the level in the room is always below what the upper limit is meant to be.
And I think that was something that was identified by certainly my local RCM group when we discussed it, was that I think there should be a check on a yearly basis. And it's not a midwife's role, by the way, for those midwives watching and having a panic. It's actually the estate's role to check these levels. Anyway, what a fantastic discussion, and so much for us to think about. And we will return to this issue, I can assure you. So there's no escape for our lovely Wendy and Catherine. And thank you so much for giving us such a lot of information in such a wonderful, accessible way. I understood all the words, and it's lovely. And it's given it, my brain is ticking over beautifully. So thank you so much for being with us. Now, I'm going to say a big thank you to Catherine and Wendy for being with us. Also, Amy, who's behind the scenes, making sure this is all being recorded beautifully and it's going to be accessible in other platforms. And for those of you who like to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, this will be available as a podcast then. Also to Paul, who's dealing with all the questions coming through to me. Big thank you to him. And also you've got your resources. If we have any other resources, we'll pop them on the Facebook or put them in newsletter if we can, which the newsletter comes out on Tuesday. So that, just have a look at that. If you don't subscribe to that for the Maternity Forum, really good. Some really nice information, and it's not huge long articles. If you want long articles, we can provide them, but you know, there's lots of accessible information. Now, next week, more midwives will know this. It's International Day of the Midwife next Friday, not this coming Friday, next Friday. And I'm so excited that next Wednesday we've got two luminary midwives. We've got Professors Leslie Page and Professor Jacqueline Duckley-Bent, who's known by everybody. So don't miss it then next week. Don't forget also to book for the Midlands Festival, 16th of May, or if you want a trip to Cardiff, and if you're in the Southwest, if you've got some project you're doing, put it in and come along and speak in Cardiff on the 12th of September. But in the meantime, I'll say a big thank you to our lovely speakers and actually all of you who've joined us this evening. Lots to think about. Do share what you've learned tonight. Get discussing it. That's what's really important, is because it's quite clear we need to know more. The more we know, the more we know. And in the meantime, take care, and we'll see you next week.